Okay. Now, last time we talked, we ended up with expulsion from the garden, right? And we talked about a few aspects of that. So we were in this second creation story, which is Genesis 2, 4b and following. We are in the Yahwist author. So everything's very anthropomorphic. And we have a sort of henotheistic understanding of theology. Do you all know this term by now, henotheistic? Okay, sure. So there is this sort of continuum of polytheistic to henotheistic to monotheistic. And really over here, there's animism. Animism is when you think pretty much everything has a spirit in it of some sort. Rocks have spirits, trees have spirits, spirits everywhere, lots of nature spirits, right? Oh, thank you. I would want very soon, thank you. Then polytheistic is we have lots of gods, right? So when we think about most of the pantheons out there are polytheistic, like all the Greek and Roman gods and like that, right? So many gods, each with their own sort of portfolio. This is a development from animism. You know, you go from every rock having a spirit to the god of the rocks, for example, right? Or god of the mountains or whatever else. Or, you know, that the spirit of a place has a spirit. So the god of this area. You know, we know that like Athena, for example, is the goddess of wisdom and warfare, but she's also the god of Athens, right? So she's both located in a certain location, but also has a certain sort of portfolio that she oversees. And then henotheism is when you say, okay, there's lots of gods out there, but we think that either one is above them all or worship one of them above them all. So we place one above all. And since we're talking about the Hebrew people, of course, that one God over all is Yahweh, right? But at the same time, they are still quite sure that there's lots of other gods out there. There's all kinds of different Baals, and there's Chemosh, and there's Asherah, and all these other gods that are in the sort of Canaanite pantheon. But that Yahweh is above them all. Or at the very least, he is their particular deity, which would be known as a tutelary deity. So if you have a particular god that you worship, again, the Athenians who worship Athena above the other gods, in the same way that the Hebrew people worship Yahweh as their tutelary deity. So we think everything's like the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, the God of Abraham. They literally mean that this is the patrilineal God of the Jews. And then later on we get a monotheistic understanding, which we are currently in, where we understand there to be only one God and none others. But when we're in the Yahwist author, who's in the 10th century BCE, right? 12,000 years ago, we're talking about a henotheistic understanding at best. So we're kind of in this range here. Either henotheistic or polytheistic with Yahweh being the tutelary deity. Meaning he's not really above anybody else, only insofar as they're concerned he's above other people. But this writer probably has him in a henotheistic situation where he is the principal deity of a quasi-creation story. We talk about this also not being a true creation story because it's not a sort of universal creation story, right? It's less concerned about creation as it is about relationship. Relationship between God and humans, between men and women, and between humans and nature. And so this is a ideological myth, primarily. Ideological meaning, why are things the way they are? So when we look at the people of this time, 10th century BCE, the vast majority of people are going to be farmers, right? It's an agrarian culture. If they're not, these people are somewhat settled in their locations, so it's an agrarian culture, but we're also probably not that long past nomadic peoples as well, right? Tents and herds. But because it's an agrarian culture, the two principal concerns of everybody is farming and childbirth, right? So what are the curses of sin? Well, they're that childbirth is hard and farming is hard. Why, if God loves us, again, this goes back to theodicy, the question of given a loving God, why is there suffering in the world? Why do bad people suffer? And this is a theodicy here. If I'm a good person, why is farming so hard? But I have weeds on my garden. Why are there worms eating all my plants? If I'm a good person, why is childbirth so painful? Why did my wife die in childbirth? Why did my child die in childbirth? And so this is a explanation of why things are the way they are with a theological context. Any thoughts on all that?
Well, that concern lasted many years.
What's that?
Childbirth and farming.
Sure.
Because for years and years, we were an agricultural society.
Right.
And many centuries the world was.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So people could definitely, still relate to this, right? I don't know if y'all do any gardening, but man. I have chipmunks who have I had so many plants I planted this past year, and I got 3 cherry tomatoes out of it because the chipmunks ate everything else that grew.
Okay, does this kind of help? I'm skipping ahead to the minor prophets. Does this kind of help explain why the people in Judah and Israel were so prone to suddenly start adopting the gods of the people around them, and why the minor prophets kept saying, because you've turned to this and this and this? Because when you read the Old Testament, it's like after all they had been through and they knew the miracles and that kind of thing of God, what would make them go back?
Sure. Well, because they're not really going back.
Okay.
This is, the people live kind of here, right? Even once you don't get monotheistic statements in the theology of the Bible until Isaiah, until sort of an exilic or post-exilic period. And so the majority of people are polytheists. The reason we hear so much about Yahweh in our Bible is because I'm going to use the term here, cult. I want to define that word first in a religious context. Cult in a religious studies context does not mean like Moonies or Jim Jones or like that. A cult in a religious studies context is when a group of people focus on one aspect of the faith to the exclusion of others, or to the certainly diminishment of others, right? And so the people, so Jerusalem, as we know, was where the principal temple of Yahweh was, right? And it's also, this happens to be where the monarchy is. So the cult of Yahweh, or the principal worship of Yahweh, gets aligned with the monarchy. The monarchy and the temple become bound together. And so the texts that we have in the Bible are ones in which endorses the monarchy. They call David the son of God. He is just right below Yahweh. He is the chosen one of Yahweh, the anointed one of Yahweh. A lot of the terms we use for Jesus, anointed one, Messiah, literally Messiah, and son of God, another term we use for David. So the temple and monarchy are closely aligned with each other. And so when the monarchy wants to consolidate power, it draws upon the worship of Yahweh to do so. In the same way, when the temple, the priests want to get more primacy for the worship of Yahweh, they call upon the monarchy to support them. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the two things. And so this worship of Yahweh gets promoted above all the other gods. These other gods are out there. And so, for example, Solomon, David's son, erects Asherah poles, centers of worship for Asherah. I think I mentioned this before, but Asherah is the consort of Yahweh in Canaanite religion. And just like any other good maypole situation, you have a pole erected, which is a phallic symbol, and then the people gather around to dance, to worship, to praise, to whatever, in a vaginal symbol around it. So this is the worship of Asherah. The worshipers of Asherah gather around this pole, which represents the phallus of Yahweh, and this is a fertility rite, just like the maypole is, right? When we have all the young maidens dancing with ribbons wrapping around the pole, it's an ancient fertility rite. So did y'all know that?
Everything.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah. So that's where the maypole comes from. It's a phallus that the maidens are celebrating, wrapping themselves around, inviting marriage / fertility, right? It's true.
I know, it's just, whoa, it was good for me. How about you?
We figured some man thought up that story.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Hey, ladies, get the ribbons.
Asherah was the name?
Yeah. So anyway, when Solomon comes around, he places these Asherah poles up around, and he later gets critiqued for it. But he's not some like crazy fringe element person here. He's just actually embracing the worship of the people, because the people are still worshiping these folks. Chemosh is this god that probably the most noteworthy worship of him revolves around child sacrifice. The altars to him were an effigy of him that had like a stove in it, and he would slide the person inside the stove and burn them to death as a sacrifice.
And this was early Judaism. It wouldn't be Judaism as it's known today,
Oh no, of course not.
but I mean, a forerunner of all that. This is
Yeah, so this is like this is pre-exilic or just post-exilic Judaism, that period. You don't get sort of monotheistic Judaism until as accepted by the vast majority of the people until pretty close to a time of Jesus. It's really late in when we actually talk about sort of Judaism as religion versus the Hebrew religion. The Hebrew religion, I would say, is more inclined towards polytheistic or henotheistic belief systems. But we'll explore when we get to the binding of Isaac, for example, the sacrifice, the concept of sacrifice of your firstborn as being a core concept in religious worship at the time, and how it's aligned with the worship of Hamosh, and so how the story of the binding of Isaac comes about. God is saying, you don't have to do this anymore. This is not a thing that I want from you. Rams are fine. You don't need to kill kids. But anyway.
It kind of evolved as you look at the totality of it. It kind of evolves. It explains why God was making Yahweh was, I'm prime in Egypt. I'll show you. Let's put all these things in here. So he's establishing his prominence throughout this whole thing.
Right.
And that explains so much when you explain that with the binding and why he would just say, here, take my son, because that's what was done.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't have that background, you think it's horrible. Well, it's
Right.
not horrible, but it's horrible.
Right. Because it has no context. So you think this God's just being a jerk by,
Testing.
the non, if you don't have the historical context, you look at that story and you think that God is the kind of person who would test you by saying, kill your child. And so it makes God, in my mind, pretty monstrous, right? Unless you understand the historical context, in which time he is the opposite of monstrous. He is trying to get rid of the monstrous practices going on amongst the people. So, but yeah, like you're saying, you see the process that's happening unfolding throughout the Bible, because what God always asks of us is to take one step beyond where we are currently. God comes to us as we are, where we are, saying, take one step further down the path that I would have for you, right? And so when you come to a polytheistic environment, which is purely agrarian, no one can read, no one can write, you probably have never seen anything outside of the 5 mile diameter around where you're born, then you have creation stories that talk about days and not billions of years. You're like, what's a billion? I have no idea what that number, we don't have a name for that number. And you don't have, egalitarian societies where men and women are equal and good and everything's great. You don't have, ideas of, if we want to assume that democracy is the highest form of sort of government, we don't have a sort of egalitarian democratic ideas being put forth, because there's trying to meet them where they are rather than where they might be 5,000 years from now, right? Did I say 5,000 years later when I wrote that number up? Is that what I did?
Yeah. Then you said or 12 BC, right?
Okay, well, that's not true at all. This is centuries. This is 3,000 years ago. I don't know where I got 12 from. For some reason, I thought I had a brain meltdown. I thought centuries were only enough, but this is actually only 3,000 years ago.
3,000?
2000,
So 10 BC,
10th century
10th century, okay.
BC. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else? Okay, so yeah, this is where we're kind of in this understanding of the world where there's lots of gods floating around. And so when we read, if you would, just go ahead and read. Yeah, please.
Moses was leading the people out of Egypt,
Mhm.
and they had the 10 Commandments, where it said, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me."
Right,
And they had constructed a Baal.
right. They had constructed
Yeah, and
an idol.
at that time, I thought that was when they stopped with that, was the belief that the other gods, that was the.
So yeah, pay attention to the wording of that.
Uh-huh,
Thou shalt have no other gods before me,
uh-huh,
right?
right.
It's not, there are no other gods,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so it's a
All right.
henotheistic
All
statement.
right.
Right.
That makes sense then, yeah.
And so the anger at, so what they're actually, it's not, they're building an idol, but not to one of the Baals or the Baals. It's probably to Hathor,
Uh-huh,
because they're fresh out of Egypt
uh-huh.
and they're building a cow effigy, right? And Hathor is is symbolized by a woman with a cow head on her, because cows are associated with milk production. Hathor is the mother deity. And therefore, being a mother deity, she's the one that's kind, compassionate, caring, nurturing, providing type figure for them, right? And so they're fresh out of Egypt. They're not, these rules they're about to get, they haven't received yet, right? And so they're working off what they know. And so when they come to a situation where they've been led into the desert, away from everything they know, away from their life, with any comforts they had back there, any security they had back there, and their leader has gone up on a mountain, he's been gone over a month at this point. And so they're like, where are we? What's going on? How are we provided for, etc. So what they turn to is their mother, right? This is a mommy, help us. We are lost. We are hungry. We don't know where we are, right? And so that's why they're building an idol to Hathor. And but this is Yahweh here exerting his prominence over Hathor and saying, you know, I choose you. I chose you people through Abraham initially. And I'm seeing that promise through. I'm still watching over you. I'm still guiding you, etc. And what you all need to understand is that I am your God. That Hathor, Osiris, Ra, whoever else you want to worship from Egypt isn't your God anymore. And when you get to here, you know, don't focus on these people. Focus on me. I'm your tutelary deity. That's what the 10 Commandments are all about. At least that commandment. Any thoughts?
When you read it now, you think of money, you think of, you have no other gods before me. So you
Right.
take it into our current text, and
Right.
you're ticking off all these other things which you put as important in your life. So it shifts
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And I don't feel, I understand better why they did what they did.
Mhm.
Where before I thought you ungrateful people.
Right.
But that puts a different
That
twist.
makes a
You
lot of
keep
sense.
putting, you keep
It has to put it
shifting.
in the context.
Well, yeah. What you get, what you end up with.
But I never thought of it.
Good. I'm like, wow, this is helping. Yeah, I mean, what you end up with is a relatable story, right? Like these people aren't villains. There aren't horrible people. They're just people. And, you know, they're slaves. They get drug out into the desert following this dude because, hey, if we follow him, we're no longer slaves. That sounds pretty good, right? They don't know this guy from literally Adam, right? And so, here they are, and of course they're complaining and scared and anxious and, like, right. If I say, hey, y'all, let's go wander out in the field for a while, I get you all tramping through the woods past lunchtime, you're like, hey, Brandon, what are you doing? Where are we going? What's the plan here, right? And I disappear for a month, right? And you're like, y'all wait here, I'll be back. And I go away for a month. They're like, where are we going to plans here? I gave you all about 40 days, about 40 minutes before you're like, okay, let's plan something else here. Sure. All right, good questions. Okay, so let's take a look at the end of chapter 4. Yeah. Nope, sorry, in chapter 3. I apologize. So we have the curses up until 19 through 19. These are all like, why is farming hard? Why is harvest hard? Why does this, this is purely ideological myth of like, why does the snake crawl in its stomach? And like all the other lizards out there, why does it crawl in its stomach? If you look closely on some snakes, you can actually see the remnants of vestigial legs, like the imprint of their scales on their sides, right? So this is their explanation of why that is. Because again, they wouldn't understand evolution at this point. Right? All right, verse 20. And the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all who live. This word Eve has its root in this word Kai, which means life. So Eve equals life giver. We talked before about naming in this culture, right? And that naming equals ownership and dominion. Right, so God had humans, or the human Adam. Again, Adam just means human. Well, the word means human. Had the human name all the creatures, or all of the livestock, all of the beasts of burden and livestock and the birds, things that in fact human beings do own, do control, right? He did not have them name all the beasts out there out in the wilderness. We talked before about this, how the beast or the animals that were inside of Eden were livestock. But out here you had all kinds of critters that were outside of paradise, that were not controlled. And so Adam named these things, the names of things we actually do own and control, but did not name the stuff outside. And the snake, the serpent, just like any other farm, right? Like if you've ever been on a farm before, what's one of the issues in the farm is snakes can get in there, right? No matter how many fences you build around the place, the snake can just right inside, right? So the snake goes from outside where all the chaos is, where all the bad things are, and gets inside the walled compound of Eden and causes chaos, as snakes do in a farm situation, right? But he's named all this stuff here and therefore has ownership over them. Now, after the fall, after things have gone awry, things have not gone according to plan, we go from the man and woman being Ish and Isha, just names for man and woman, and Eve being called Isha, to being named Eve by Adam. So what's happening here is Adam is claiming ownership and dominion over his wife. So this is the establishment of patriarchy. why do I literally own my wife? It's because of this situation. So it should be noted that it's an act of the fall that caused this to happen. That before this time, men and women, the woman was designed to be alongside, at the actual side of the man, not behind, not below. And certainly in their laws, women were property. If a woman, for example, was raped or otherwise had sex with prior to marriage, it was considered damage to the property of the father, and you would have to pay the father what they would imagine would be the difference between the bride price of her as a virgin and the bride price of her as not a virgin. So you're compensating him for damages at that point. And you do have a bride price where the man would pay the father a certain amount of money to literally buy the woman from him, right? So you're going from the father being the owner to the husband being the owner of the woman. Which is another reason why it's so precarious when a man dies or divorces his wife or whatever else, because then she is this thing without protection, right? That's, in their mind, almost like an object without protection, and therefore is up for grabs from anyone.
Is there any mention at all about how long Adam and Eve were there before the fall?
No.
Could be any kind of time.
Again, we're in a mythological situation, right? So it's not really about keeping track of how much time. It's not the focus, not really the point of the story. The point of the story, again, is about relationship and, the sort of theological sort of story. But I would point out that in this Garden of Eden, there were two trees named. There was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And only the tree of knowledge of good and evil was the one forbidden to them. The tree of life was not. Until such time as they had the other tree. And then, as we'll see, thank you for the segue here. The Lord God said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." So he's eaten the fruit, the knowledge of good and evil. And because all the gods are anthropomorphic, they look just like us, act just like us, think like just us. But now we have all this knowledge that they have. And now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. So if he is around to continue eating from the tree of life, he'll just live forever. And become like us. What are gods like? Gods are like us, but they know lots of stuff and they live forever. Can't have that. It says here, you see the man has become like one of us, right? Become like one of the gods.
Like it was a good thing?
No, because they don't want other, it's a jealousy situation. They don't want other people in the, we're gods, you're humans, you shouldn't be like us. So we gotta keep you down. And so the way they do that is keeping them from the tree of life, keeping them from living forever. Okay. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a sword, flaming and turning to guard the way of the tree of life. All right. And that is where we ended up last time. Okay. So got kicked out of the garden, out into the world. Any other questions about that before we move on? Okay. All right. Let's see. What do I want to erase here?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was that
I remember reading somewhere, was that the, not the beginning, but was that the fall? Was that the, like, creation of the ego? Like,
Say more. In what kind of psychological context or?
when, like, I think I remember reading on somewhere, that once they had the fall,
Yeah.
then that was like the creation of the ego.
So if ego here means differentiation, then I would say yes. So we talked before about the unity that exists between, you know, go back to the switch between God and humans, that in the garden we had God and humans very close to each other, right? The only thing separating the two of them at that point had been, you know, eating of this tree. And you know, it says that God walked with them in the cool of the evening. So he was like buddy with them, right? And so the idea of sin as separation from God, right? So if we're talking about ego in the sense of differentiation, then I would say yes, right? That, you know, that if you're trying to connect this this mythology or this myth with psychology or psychological mythology, which is something that way maybe first or second session here, people like Joseph Campbell, who was drawing from the works of he cited Carl Jung quite a bit, right? And so if you're reading Jungian psychology as it pertains to this myth, then yes, I could see where they're saying this is the differentiation of the self is the development of the ego, differentiation of the self from God.
The separation.
Right. All right. And I apologize, Beverly, I did not warn you before I raced before. I apologize. Did you get the photo? Okay, good. Good. I always try to remind, before I go off and race things, I try to give people a chance. What's that?
So I won't miss anything. I keep taking them in between.
That's great. Great. I'm glad it helps. Okay, so Cain and Able. What are those scamps up to? Who wants to read?
Oh, really?
Great.
Anything, take off the next.
That's right.
Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord regarded for Abel and his offspring, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it.
Great. Okay, Cain here is the sort of proto farmer. He's the first one working the farm, and Abel is the herdsman, right? So underlying this to begin with, if we're looking at a cultural context, the Hebrew people were initially nomadic. And so at the very, like, as a proto myth, at the very origins of this myth, It's entirely possible this myth was told during the herding times and nomadic times, where the herdsmen would be seen as the ones closer to God, not like those city folk. You know, those city folk have their highfalutin ways. They think they know better than us. They're worshiping all these different gods because they have all, you know, they worship, they worship who knows what, like statues and whatever. But we got the real faith over here. We're dedicated to God, to Yahweh, and like that. So it may explain why the farmer becomes kind of the enemy, whereas the herdsman is kind of the poor, the set upon quasi-hero of the story, the good person in the story, right? So what does Abel do? What does he sacrifice? Verse 4. First born flock and the fat portions, right? What does Cain give? Verse 3. Quick question, folks. What's it say? For the ground. Right. What's the problem? So here again, this is a story told. What's that?
The Lord liked Abel's better.
He did. But if we don't know sort of the context of this, then we don't understand why, right? So again, we're talking about these myths being understood by an already established community with various religious rules. The firstborn of the flock is what you would give to make a good sacrifice, right? In the New Testament, we have these terms as Jesus as the firstborn of all creation, right? That and because he is the firstborn of all creation, he is the acceptable sacrifice. He is the one who can be sacrificed for our sins. And again, going back to this child sacrifice idea, the sacrifice of Isaac, for example, as the firstborn, if you really want to dedicate yourself to God, it's the firstborn that you give. But this is just animals here, and this is how it was done. Like the best and the brightest of the creatures, especially the fattiest portions, you would give to God. Now, the fruit of the ground is a little bit more confusing because it sounds like he's just giving vegetables or fruit or whatever, right? No big deal. Well, fruit of the ground refers to the actual stuff that falls to the ground. And so it can be the stuff that's like overly ripe or diseased or otherwise not so great that falls to the ground. Once it's on the ground, it can get, kind of messed up in many ways. It's not the primo stuff, right? Also, in Jewish law, this refers to it's kind of their welfare program for the poor. Right. So when the workers would go into the fields and gather whatever they're gathering, they would cut off stuff. And whatever fell to the ground, whatever they thought was like, we don't want that one, and toss it to the ground, or if they were just cutting and it fell to the ground, or they're carrying along and it fell to the ground, whatever touched the ground was for the poor. That was their version of, like I said, welfare. They had two ways of caring for the poor in an agrarian society. One, if you had parcels of land here, when you tilled the land, you would do it in a circle. You would do it sort of in spiral. And these areas here became areas reserved for the poor. So the poor could work the corners of the land, right? And so, you know how you'll see Orthodox Jews with like the long curls on the other, and they won't cut their beards. That is a development, rabbinic development of this ancient law of you shall not shave the corners of the field. So the corners of yourself you should not shave either. And so like shaving the corners meaning like, maybe I'll just go a little bit above, just kind of work the angles here a little bit more. That's shaving the corners of your field, right? You're taking less and less, we're giving less and less to the poor. So it's an act of greed. And really, once you get, a bunch of parceled out, these areas become decently sized, right? If you've read the book of Ruth before, you have a situation where Ruth, in her poverty, is invited out to the fields of Boaz to gather, but he really hooks her up because he doesn't make her follow along behind them and just pick up the scraps that they're tossing to the ground. But he lets her gather with the workers. So he lets her get the good stuff. What the fruit of the ground here would represent is the stuff that's fallen to the ground, stuff that's meant for the poor, the castings off, the stuff that you don't want yourself, right? And so you're saying that God is, I'm doing you a favor, God, by doing this for you, right? So this is why God, excuse me, puberty, guys, I'm sorry. I apologize. This is why God is upset with this, right? And here we have this sort of poetic, metaphorical language. If you do well, we have said, if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. It's a desire for you, but you mismaster it. It's this lurking idea of like a brigand or a beast of a predator lurking outside. Again, this idea of the lawlessness of the outside, the chaos, the untamed areas working their way into order. We talked before, I think maybe the third session, about how the Old Testament's all about order versus chaos, not good versus evil, right? All right. Any questions about all that? Verse 8.
Oh, that went on. I mean, think about sibling rivalry. And, it's like, we said, well, we don't know. I got some agreeing. You certainly given a really positive explanation as to why. But I think that's what happens with siblings as well. They don't necessarily know why their parents may be so angry with them in some way. I mean, the story is so eternal.
Mm-hmm.
You see it all the time.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. That's why these things stand the test of time, right? These stories become important to us for thousands of years. We talked before about, a myth being something you can project yourself into, and it resonates with you, and whatever you put into it, it kicks back out at you, right? I was the only child, so I got away with nothing.
Oh, we got away with everything.
Okay, fine. I couldn't blame anybody, I guess.
As a single mother, I often look back and say, oh, if I only had a second child, it would be so different. Because as a single mother, it's the first time for you around as well. And so it's like, oh.
It's a single mother, you mean mother of a single child?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I transferred that as a mother of a single child. And as a father of a single child, you're both high, here you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different. Because I would think I would have done, I wouldn't let that child do that again. Oh, no. Oh, yeah.
All right, verse 8.
Experience teachers, Johnny.
That explains so much.
As only child? Yeah, oh, yeah. No, absolutely. If I wore a sign, it would be more clear. I totally get it. Verse 8.
Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out into the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. When the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him. When Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Okay. So, again, we have a couple of sort of legal ideas for foundations of their laws being mentioned here. This blood on the ground, calling up to heaven for vengeance. It was believed that the nephesh was sort of held in the blood. The life force were in the blood. When it spilled out, it would call up to heaven. Right? That if it was wrongfully spilled, and that God could hear this life force, the blood calling up to him. And we look at this in the context of Jesus with Pontius Pilate saying to the crowds, the Jewish crowd, who do you want to be saved, or who do you want to be released to you? And they say, Barabbas, crucify this other guy, right? And he says, I don't know why I would crucify him. He doesn't do anything worthy of crucifixion. And they say, crucify him. His blood be on us and on our children. And so the pouring out of the blood onto them, or them being sort of red-handed, right, is this idea that if you kill someone unfairly, if you murder them, then it becomes a generational curse upon you, right? That God will take vengeance upon that, and in their understanding, these curses can be generational in nature. And then, being driven out, I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. The laws of the time really only covered you if you were a citizen of the area that you were in. This is why when we talk about the people who are mentioned so often in the Bible, really need charity or to be watched out for. Widows, orphans, and sojourners, right? We talk about widows, these people that not have neither father nor husband now to protect them, to watch over them, that they are property up for grabs from anyone, so they have no protections. Orphans are the same thing. Children are property of the father, and so they have the same issues. And sojourners, or aliens, right, are people that are not in their own lands, right? They've traveled to the lands of some other tribes, some other clans, some other empire, some other whatever. And because they're in that area, their laws don't protect them. So you can do anything you want to them, and there's no legal protection for them. So all three of these are people without legal protection, or very little legal protection, which is why the Jewish laws become, or charity becomes sort of focused on these people, that you should care for these people, because the laws do not. And so here again, they're speaking to people who already have these legal understandings. So when Cain is being exiled from his lands, he's without protection, and anybody can just kill him, murder him, rob him, rape him, whatever, enslave him. So God's putting this mark on him to protect him. And this is, this mark on Cain's head can be related to the sort of status of the Jews as the chosen people. And any cursory look at the history of Jewish people will see lots of sojourning, not having their own land, traveling through other people's lands, being in the diaspora, being in exile, lots of people trying to kill them, blaming them for all sorts of things, lots of anti-Semitic understandings of things. So the Jews, people try to kill them over and over and over and over and over again, and they're still with us, right? So it does, if we're looking at ideological myth, traits the sort of protection of God, this very moment of Cain, right? And even when Cain sins, even when, and again, the explanation for why they're often exiled, why they often lose their homes, is because they do sin against God, and God is punishing them by exiling them from the land. But God continues to watch over them no matter what. Any thoughts on that? Questions on that?
Have any idea what kind of mark it was? If it was, of course, I mean, I know it's mythological, but was it an actual mark, or was it just something that the Lord, like a, wow,
It doesn't say here, but
with their around their head?
yeah. So in other texts, when people are marked, it is usually on the forehead, especially marks of protection. What's the last time we talked? Last time we talked about baptism, right? And the sealing oil, or the chrism oil on the forehead, right? Because in pretty much every culture, this is the location of the third eye, or the seventh chakra, or the spiritual font where spirits come and go through you. So if you're going to protect someone, not only is it pretty clear to be seen by people, but also it serves to protect you from spiritual invasion as well. So you're going to put warding stuff on the forehead. So probably something there.
Conversely, it's kind of a curse in one way, though, if you look at it from that way, because, oh, I give up. No one can kill you. So you've got that other side. In other words, he's sent out, not able to make a living because the ground isn't going to support him. So says God. And guess what? I'm going to keep you doing this. I'm going to keep it on. So yes, you're protected from not being killed, but in that same thing, it doesn't stop either.
Yeah. And is it passed down to his children? Is a mark passed down? That's never mentioned in the Bible either.
It will. We're about to hit it actually, where his children claim that protection. It's interesting though, like your point in popular culture, so not the Bible at all, but there have been some vampire stories that say that Cain was the first vampire because he was made to live forever, right?
That's a stretch.
Like I said, this is popular culture. This is 20th century pop culture horror story stuff, but yeah. All right. 17. Oh, Nod, East of Eden. By the way, the book / movie East of Eden. This is where we get the phrase, right?
Oh,
So this place of aimless wandering, this place of loss of purpose, this place of sort of where the sin happens out here. But Nod literally means to wander or sort of to oscillate, sort of kind of move about without purpose or direction, right? So again, this sort of devolution from order to more and more chaos as you go out from this ordered state. Right? We keep moving east. That's where if you're along here in Canaan, and you keep going east, that's where all the wilderness is, right? You get the Badlands, you get some desert, you get the kind of not so great stuff out east. Okay. Any questions on that? I'm about to erase some stuff if you want to get some graphics.
Brandon, has it ever been found, the city of Nod or the land of Nod, archaeology wise?
No, I think here again we're in this sort of mythological time. I mean, there are always expeditions to find these things because there are always like mega churches and conferences of churches like that who are literalists, local literalists who want to find these things. So like every few years, one of these large churches or conferences will sponsor a expedition to go find the Ark, for example, right? And they'll, like somebody will dig up some wood somewhere that may have been part of the boat at some point and call it the Ark, right? Because the other thing is, if you're an archaeologist, you're happy to take the money of sponsors who are going to pay you to go dig those things, right? Yeah, like I'm not here to tell you what to believe. Believe it or not, even though we're a caller. That's not what Episcopalians do. But trying to get literal, we're about to hit a thing that will really make you question how this can be literally interpreted. There we go. All right. Now I'm going to make you pay for volunteering yourself to read today as you read verse 17 and following.
Beginnings of civilization. Cain knew his wife.
Who?
Okay.
His wife. Where'd she come from? Right?
could have been his sister.
Cain knew his wife. Go ahead.
And she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and named it Enoch after his son.
Okay.
Enoch.
What in the world is happening here? Okay, how many people do we have so far according to the Bible? 3, right? We had 4. We killed off one of them. We got 3 left. And suddenly there's a wife. And suddenly there's enough people for a city. Right? So if you're trying to read this literally, how? How can you read this literally? Right? If Adam and Eve are the progenitors of every person on this earth, then why is it that when you wander to the east a bit, there's already enough people out there for a city? Why is there a wife for Cain to meet? Yeah.
He even says like everyone's gonna kill me now.
Right. Yeah.
Who was it?
Exactly. So, we talked before about the location of Eden being this convergence of rivers. There's all kinds of the world out there. The Eden was just sort of this enclosed area that's sectioned off, not part of the rest of the world. But now we're encountering the rest of the world. And there's already people out there and stuff. So again, this isn't so much a creation myth as it is about relationship, right? Because there's God, it doesn't say anything about God creating all of this other stuff, just working with the people in it. All right. Go on, please.
Mhm. To Enoch was born Arad, and Arad was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah the father of Methuselah, whatever. And Methuselah the father of Lamech. Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Adha, and the name of the other Zillah. Adha bore Jabal, and he was the ancestor of those who live in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the ancestor of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain, who made all kinds of bronze and iron tools. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah.
Okay, great. So lots of dudes being born to people and then lots of women showing up to marry them, right? So lots of women from somewhere coming into this clan. And you have very anachronistic stuff going on here, like iron making, for example. If we're talking about super early civilization, no iron, right? Bronze, sure, but even then, like it's, you know, we're initially working with flint and steel, or not flint, steel, flint, and then we get into, you know, bronze, and then eventually we get some iron, but it takes a while. Yeah. All right, 23.
Lamech said to his wives, Adha and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 77-fold.
So going back to what you're saying, Rita, about you know, this isn't mentioned ever again. It is. So they're using this as verification or a validation of wanting revenge against people, right? That they are the inheritors of this mark. And this, if you'll notice in your Bible, it's probably set off like in verse,
Yeah.
right? Whatever that is, it's usually some sort of song or verse or poetry, something like that, that's present in the culture. It's being included in the text. It sort of fits into this area. So this is probably some sort of tribal saying, tribal song, tribal something or other that's popular, that's being shoved into the text. As you know, why do we say this thing? Why is this a thing that our tribe says? Here we go. Here's why it is said. And so this is, again, a cultural ideology. And it's good verification, you know, it's a good validation for if you want to go, you know, somebody throws a rock at you, you can go kill their whole family because, or, you know, if you want to, if they go over and you know, take one of your sheep, you can go kill them all and take their sheep or whatever, because you've injured me in some way. Now I get, because God has given me this mark, I get to take vengeance on you. And I'll do 7-fold because now they keep track of like every generation gets to add another multiplier to it, right?
Which keeps you constantly in debt to Yahweh. In other words, it says it increases it, right? 77-fold. So in other words, it isn't just I'm being avenged 7-fold. It increases the amount of.
So it binds you to Yahweh.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, you're just gonna keep stretching it out. Okay, you killed 7-fold, you killed 77-fold, 34.
and when it comes time for the Hebrew people to come back and claim Canaan, this is the sort of, you know, this is sort of ideas that are underlying that. Like, I can wipe out your entire people, I quit genocide, because you've done me wrong by taking my land. So I'm going to take your land and everybody you know's land in response to it. 25.
Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son named Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel, because Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and named him Enoch. At that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord.
They have been already, so we're not really sure what that. I mean, they've already been using the name Yahweh, but
Father Keith said, I wrote it in my Bible. That was when they started using Yahweh.
Interesting to me that Eve named Seth.
yeah, so you have ownership over the child, right? Right. Dominion over the child. You told the kid what to do. All right, chapter 5. Now I want you to about to get into another lineage here. I want you to, well, somebody read. Give Johnny a break. Yeah. She suffered enough today.
Okay, I will.
Great.
This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man. When Adam,
So this, when it's saying man, when God created man, when it names him man, that is Adam. There, it means humankind, not man. Right.
when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enoch. And after he became the father of Enoch, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters.
Okay. Just to not torture you to death here. Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, etc. So you just repeat the same Lamech, everything over and over again. Now, I want to take a close look at chapter 5 versus chapter 4, where you have a shift in the naming of God back to just God by itself. So no longer do we have the Lord God or the Lord. We talked before about when it says all caps Lord like that, it means Yahweh. Actually, it literally says it means Yahweh in the text, or is Yahweh in the text. We're back here to Elohim. And we're back to a creation story. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, blessed them, and named them humankind when they were created. So what does this sound like? Does this remind you of anything we've read before? Being made in likeness of God, sort of big picture, pulled way out, humankind being created, not individual people being created, but sort of humans being created. So this is going back to the priestly writer that we saw in Genesis 1:1 to 2:4a. And so if you want to go back, Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all their multitude, and on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. But God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all working in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. This is the list of the descendants of Adam. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them humankind, and they were created. If you take out this 2:4b to Genesis 4, you lift it out and just keep reading from Genesis 2:4a to 5:1, it just flows, right? And the language becomes the same kind of language again. This is a priestly writer. And if you'll notice, the ancestry, the names mentioned here, Enosh and all these Maha something or Meh somethings, and something in Lamech, they sound a lot like the ancestry we just read in the previous accounting, right? This is the same ancestry or close to it being told for two different literary traditions. All right, so we have the Yahwist and the tradition that he received or they received, and then the priestly writers and the tradition that they received. And that's why they're so close to each other, is because they're practically the same list, but just, it's a game of telephone where the names get changed around a little bit here and there.
Except that Eve named Seth in one, and Adam named Seth in the other.
Here.
There you go. Okay, notable people in this list. About to erase some more stuff. Methuselah's notable, right? Before we get to Methuselah, I want to talk to you about this guy, Enoch. Yeah. So Enoch walked with God. And Enoch, Enoch had lived for 65 years, became father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah for 300 years. So he is 365 years old at this point, which is, a solar calendar. Calendar. Length of time. Thus days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. So because of this line, he walked with God, and then God took him. It doesn't say that he died, right? And so in this whole tradition develops around Enoch of Enoch never dying. Never dies. And because he walked with God, it's understood that God showed him all kinds of things that other human beings don't get to see. And so what we end up with is apocryphal texts that are apocalyptic in nature. Apocalypse literally meaning to be revealed, to have your eyes uncovered. And apocryphal being those texts that are not canonical, right? They're not in the main Bible, but either in what we call the Apocrypha, or texts don't even make it that far, that are kind of out there. But there are several books attributed to Enoch. The first of which is an apocalyptic text, much like Daniel or Revelation. So Enoch becomes like Daniel or John of Patmos, right? There's people that God is revealing some sort of hidden thing to. In the book of Enoch, he gets carried up into heaven, much like John does, and gets to see the big picture, the inner workings and sort of future plans for everything. He gets to talk with angels, hang out with angels, etc. As a result of this, we get development of what's called Enochian magic. Enochian magic being one of the principal magic systems in the Western world. And it uses what it believes to be angelic language, the alphabet and language of the angels for its magical system. And it's all about coercion of angels, warding off of demons, binding and compelling these spiritual beings to do your will. And this is still practiced today by people and becomes core to the Western magic system, which is generally known as Hermetic magic. Which is derived from the god Hermes. But this Hermetic magic, even as late as Queen Victoria had a court magician in her court, named John Dee, and he was a Hermetic mage who knew of and practiced Enochian magic. So this Enoch guy, here at the very beginning of the world, gets a lot of good press, right? He gets to get a lot of stories written about him and gets carried through all the way to, a century and a half or so ago. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Jumping a few centuries into the American, the spiritualists who kind of popped up, mostly women.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if they were coming in on that Enochian magic.
Yeah. So this spiritualism became very popular.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm thinking of Mary Beth Baker Eddy and all those other women who all of a sudden were
Yeah.
fired up.
Fired up, yeah. Caught the spirit. Yeah, so this is absolutely this interest in Hermetic magic, Enochian magic, talking to spirits, binding spirits, compelling spirits, etc. is all part and parcel
What
of
made
this.
me think of it was the Victorian
Right.
aspect to it. And I went, oh, here we go, there's the thread.
Yep,
Oh,
exactly. And just as a quick aside, you'll find that throughout history, women tend to align themselves with spiritualism and mysticism and prophecy. The reason this is because you have this patriarchal hierarchy. Right, that's dudes promoting dudes, and women have no place in this hierarchy, right? The church is a patriarchal hierarchy, right? And women have no place in it, right? Well, you can be nuns if you want to go, tend the field for a while or care for the poor, babies or whatever. We don't care about that, so go do that. But otherwise, you have no place in our structures. But if they can say, I talk to God directly, right? I don't need you to tell me what to believe because God is talking to me directly. And suddenly they jump the line, right? Suddenly they don't need this patriarchal system any longer. They can go to top because God talks to them directly. So it becomes, these modes of spirituality become modes of feminine empowerment, feminist empowerment over the millennia. And you see this in the early church, centers where women are prophesying get stamped out with great prejudice by the early church because women are using this as a mode of empowerment. Yeah, good, thank you. Try to push through the end of this thing. We're a little bit over time. It's, I mean, stick with me here for a second. Methuselah, oldest dude ever, according to the Bible, right? This is a good Jeopardy question or crossword puzzle question. Who's the oldest person to ever live? Methuselah. And then again, this guy Lamech gets mentioned both in this ancestry and the other one. Right? And then we get Noah. We're about to head into Noah. So, yay, Noah. Any questions on this? Any thoughts on this?
I've had a teacher one time that told me that Methuselah drowned.
Why is that?
He did the math, and the flood was at the same age as Methuselah.
Oh, there you go. Should have got on the boat. That's why I never turn down an invitation to go on the boat. I always get on the boat, y'all.
I can't say my faith.
What's that?
My faith tradition does not depend on that.
Oh, does it not? Yeah, so speaking of faith traditions, yeah, I mean, we're looking at, these things literally happen, or the literalist. It becomes, I think, you have to do a lot of tap dancing to make it work, right? When you're having, go from 3 people to cities of people in one generation. All right, anything else? Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thank you. Nancy, if you're still around, thank you for hanging in there.